Sounds good. You guys all ready? I'll do my best. I will be very conscious not to talk too much in between playing. You know how that goes, though. Sometimes.
I'll do an intro and we'll get
Sure.
3, 2, 1. Hi everybody, my name is Hoyan Pan. Welcome to today's live stream. We're here with Ensemble Block. We have a very special presentation for you today. If you've ever been to a drum corps show and you're standing in the lot and you're just wowed and amazed by everything that you're seeing, there's a whole other level of musicianship and performance that's going on underneath. And we have a very special insight today with Professor Paul Rennick and the Santa Clara Vanguard percussion section. If you can imagine standing in the lot next to Paul and he's your good friend and he's whispering in your ear and saying, hey, check this out and watch this part and look over here and do this. That's what we're gonna try to provide for you today. So we have a couple camera angles for you to choose from. We're also going to be producing this after the fact so that you'll be able to watch this with high quality audio and high quality video as well. So with that being said, please help me welcome Professor Paul Rennick and the Santa Clara Vanguard Percussion Ensemble section.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Thanks to Ensemble Block for allowing us to do this. It's great to have another performing opportunity with the tours being a little shorter this year. There's, I think, an entire week that's not part of the tour, so we have fewer performances. So we're always kind of looking for ways to play and to, our excuse just to get out there and play. So what we'd like to do is sort of walk through a general walkthrough of the show and talk about like the inspiration for what we're doing and how it's done, and maybe point out some things that are kind of under the radar that you wouldn't notice otherwise. But let's get started. Right now, our show is called Avant Garde, and there's the actual show title was gotten to, like, I think after we significantly started putting the music together. So the music seemed that way, and I think we're a design team is fantastic, and I think everything has been written for percussion. Not only by myself, Sandy, and Dave Isaacs, who does the sound design, but it's also influenced by the rest of the design team, like the visual designers and the choreographers and the performance coaches, and all that stuff plays a part in what we're doing. And so we're going to start with the intro of the show, and the way we perform it in the parking lot or to prepare is slightly different than the way the full corps plays it. We actually have our version of stuff so that we can simply get more repetitions in, and we can have a streamlined way to rehearse, so we don't have to count stuff that it's not our focus. We're basically getting to what we are doing. So we're going to start what we consider the beginning of the show would be the first note of the front ensemble chord, and this is kind of our inspiration by a piece by Arvo Pärt. It's called Fretres, and for me personally, it's a hugely inspirational piece. I remember seeing one of the early performances of it with Kronos Quartet at McFarland Auditorium at SMU. I remember exactly where I was at that moment because it was profound. It was really it's a special piece. It's it's everybody who knows that piece kind of is affected in a different way, but there is an effect to it. And I remember we were trying to put a piece together, trying to compile multiple pieces into an introductory piece. And I remember doing a faculty recital not that long ago. Some of my colleagues at UNT, we played George Crumb's Idol of the Misbegotten. And if you know that piece, it's for amplified flute and 3 percussionists. It's serious. The way it starts is so magical. And in terms of, I remember being on stage and hearing people in the audience literally breathing. That's how focused it was, and that's how it's a testament to his music. We don't use that music exactly, but we wanted to capture that effect. So most of the pieces that we actually chose contain some element that really affects somebody. It's not all the same, but there has to be that nugget of inspiration in there that affects people, and the cool factor or the wow factor is in there somewhere, and you don't have to analyze it to death to know that, but you just know how you feel when you play a piece. So we're going to start with what we call movement 1. And this is like the core is being introduced. We decided to start in a more spatial way, which makes it it makes it challenging for the front ensemble. Just isolated chords out in space, and it's a slow tempo. We're going to have our drum major Megan help us out today, and we're going to take the introduction all the way to the downbeat of movement 2. You got it? We're going to just take that first chunk, and I think the method that we're going to use today is we're just going to play the chunk of music, and then I'll talk about it, point some things out, and then we'll play that chunk again. And then we'll just move on through the show. The show is contained in 5 movements, or 5 big parts to it, and each part has a little bit multiple parts within it, and I'll try to explain all of that, and then hopefully by the end of this whole process, it's just a little more fun to listen to. It's a little more, you have a little more insight into what's being played, and so you can understand it and look for certain things, and then make it more enjoyable for everyone. All right, so thank you very much. All right, here we go. This is going to be movement 1. We're going to rehearse everything without a metronome today. We're going to play all the chunks of music without a metronome. That's not to say we are against the metronome. I'm just saying it's a little probably easier for you to hear in this environment. All right, here we go. Let's take it. This is on Megan. All right, good job. So that is the first way we decided to start the show. Before that actually happens, there's an entire visual effect that's handled electronically, and it's sort of like dropping pebbles into a pond and the ripples come out. And that eventually grows into the first mallet note. So there's a couple things to notice when we're doing this. The sound designer is Dave Isaacs. He does a fantastic job. I think I especially like working with Dave because he's very tasteful, he's very considerate, he's a really good musician, and he offers something that is like conversational. In other words, the cumulative nature of what he does adds to the whole production value, and it all works together seamlessly, which I think is a crucial component in terms of the way we play. But one of the things that we decided to do was build these machines. I saw a television series not too long ago called The Servant. It's an Apple TV thing. It's really interesting. M. Night Shyamalan, and the whole soundtrack is really these things are called apprehension engines, and they play a huge role in the soundtrack of this movement. And it's just captivating. If you've ever seen it or heard the soundtrack, it's fascinating. So if you want to look at all 3 of these machines are slightly different. Like this one has a crank, and so I just gave our sound engineer Luke Vogt, I asked for his advice. He's a band director, and he's got a bunch of band parents to help him out, and he's got a couple of people that are kind of, from what I understand, specializing in sort of engineer or retired engineers. And so I just showed him the specs of it. I said, here's what it is. It would be great if we had a bunch of these across the front. And so they're hollow boxes the microphone actually catches what's inside of the box, and it's really fascinating. Do you want to like play a couple notes or do a couple things on them? There's a lot of variety that you can get out of these things. So when all of those sounds are going through the system, it's really dramatic and it's very cinematic. And the idea was not to take care of the sound design acoustically, but it was to sort of have the players participate in sort of an improvisatory way and actually react in real time to the sound design and react to what's going on. And so you'll notice that each person who has one of these machines comes off of their mallet part, goes to the machine, and we alternate that throughout, so that there's a really natural way that these things happen. And thanks to Luke for cranking them out so quick, and they've worked perfectly ever since we've had them. A couple of other things to notice, that the arpeggiated figures in the marimba part are similar to the arpeggiated figures in, if you know fretras, there's a huge violin part that's really prominent throughout. We tried to imitate that just to give a hint of what the tune is. The other thing that was different about what we do, and something to keep an eye on, is the bass drum parts. That was actually sort of dictated by the visual team, and Mike had an idea. Michael Gaines had an idea about what to do and how to get out of the form that happened before we did it, and it makes perfect sense. But what it required, I think, for us to do is to play a completely different part in the bass drums. So if you watch the show, you'll notice that the top bass drummer gets sent out this way, and the next bass drum gets sent out the other way, and sometimes they're up to 25 yards apart. So instead of having a part that they just add on to, they're different parts. They're composed, and then they eventually visually come together, and that's when musically they all come together. So we're gonna hear that just one more time, and then after we hear it one more time, we'll back up to a slightly different, later part, and then we'll go into the next movement as well. Trying to think if there's anything I can remember here, anything I'm forgetting. It's just a serene way to start. And I think that, I must say to all the directors and all the designers out there, the beginning of the show only happens once. It really, and I know that's a simple thing to say, but it's true. It only happens once. So what you're going to do in the beginning of the show really is kind of a unique time in the show. It's a very special moment. People haven't heard anything, and then this is the first thing that they hear. And so the dramatic quality of that chord and everything is always, by me, it's always met with the same reaction, which is, it's really interesting. I'm drawn into the first chord and to the space around it. And then I watch the people sort of let this cloud of music sort of accumulate, and then all of a sudden it hands to the battery, and then we build and we're off to the races. All right, so let's hear that one more time. If I can think of any other insights to let you know, I'll do that after this rep. So let's just do that exact same thing one more time, please. And I know I shouldn't say this, but I don't want the players to wait too long between reps, so I'm gonna try to move this thing along pretty quick. So let's do the same thing again, please. What's that? Oh, you know what? The biggest, it's Aaron on drum staff just reminded me, one of the biggest things that we've decided to pull back this year is a theremin. And Christian is our theremin master, right? Let's hear it for Christian, right? So this is a college music major that has never played a theremin before, and then I just handed him the box and said, okay, you got to go learn how to play this. And the thing about this instrument is it cuts like a knife. Like the projection of the theremin is always just so easy to blend and balance with it. It's a prominent part that has a melodic figure. So he basically takes the top note of all the chords and sort of creates a line that connects us through all the chords. And you know what? It matches the concept of the show, because it has a weird pitch bendy sort of inaccurate center of pitch, and that makes it sound strange. And I think that is the thing that I never get tired of hearing that, right? It actually sort of the way it bends out of certain moments leading to another chord. It's like a bunch of really modern glissandi that really make it sound great. So let's hear that one more time, please. Right, so we basically, another texture that we should mention is the cymbals do an actual cymbal roll right before it happens, and it's like the perfect tune to experiment with textures and sounds and less rhythmic and more just quality of overlapping sounds that happen the whole time. And then all of a sudden we get to the next part. And so we went from the extreme serenity of the first chords to total and utter chaos. And that was kind of the directive. And the piece that we're going to use in movement 2 is by John Corigliano, and it's called Hallucinations, or it's actually called 3 Hallucinations, and this is the third one called Ritual. I remember listening to this a bunch and realizing it was tailor-made for drum corps. It's one of those pieces that you can take many different sections of it, and it actually works as well. But the first thing that we do is try to experiment with doing something a little different in the snare line. And that is, once again, not just splitting parts or adding on to the same part, but having 2 totally different composed parts happening at the same time. And having no low end in the whole thing and just upper stratosphere, so it's trumpets and snare drums, it just gives this chaotic atmosphere. And that's the whole point of it, is to create that kind of texture and that kind of feeling. And I think it's one of the more challenging things that we've done in terms of doing it, and they do it so well. I mean, it's one of those things that I actually, when we passed it out, I was a little worried about, how possible is this to do this thing, and they're fantastic. These players are really great, and so we've taken this idea to the extreme. So can we start where the quads come in? And this is towards the end of the build in movement 1, and we're going to go taking it all the way up to, letter B. Let's just do it up to letter B, all right? And at the end of this presentation, we'll do a whole run through. So I'm just going to segment things through, and then we'll just put it all together at the very end. All right, so can we take it from when the quads come in, bridge the gap, there's a grand pause in between these to create some tension, and then we hit you with the chaos in the beginning. And the thing to watch for sure is that first part in this snare book. All right, here we go. There you go. It's exciting, huh? It's really exciting because of a number of things. The orchestration of what's happening, and just the way they play it. It's just really, they take control in a way that always makes it feel chaotic. That entire phrase will release eventually now into a much more dark place. But I just wanted you to really take note of that. So the people that write the music are myself, Sandy, who does a masterful job at all the keyboard stuff. Like I said, Dave does the sound design, but another huge component is Evan Van Doren. We have lots of meetings and we talk all the time as far as the design team, and then Evan will mock up sort of the initial version of what we all think it should be. And a lot of times some of those cues are really helpful for me to figure out like the idea of what's behind the piece. And so this is this is one of those sections where I think that we hit the nail on the head in terms of the mood that we're trying to create. So let's take the same chunk and let's actually go a little further. Can we go all the way up to F? You guys know where F is? Here we go. This is going to be starting at the end of movement 1, and we're going to take it all the way through that first bit, and then all the way up to letter F, which is about halfway through it, right? Okay. All right, and so there's so many things going on, it's tough to point them all out. I'm not gonna actually point out a bunch of rhythms or specific little tiny things. We're actually gonna, I think, we'll eventually put the music up underneath these videos. So instead of talking about very specific things, we'll just do that later, and you can kind of take it all in and know what to look for right now. And so one of the things that we have is a fantastic timpanist. So the next section we're gonna come into has some seriously, I would say unnoticed chromatic stuff that's incredibly hard. I mean, it's like I think that's a testament to how well Harrison plays it. Is that it goes under the radar in terms of being blended, but once you get your ear on it, it's incredibly difficult in terms of just how it works with the battery and all that kind of stuff. Other things are like we have keyboard players playing ratchets and anything that's going to create that atmosphere, that mood in terms of chaos and stress. At the beginning, the vibraphones are all the way up at the top of the keyboard, you know, like with pedals down, creating a really dissonant, sort of stressful atmosphere. And then halfway through it, we lay into the buzz roll thing. And you'll notice there's some conversational part that's happening in the battery. So when you see with the full core, you'll notice that that's in between soloists, and that's in between solely like section lines that are happening in the horn line, and we sort of support and outline that. But at the same time, we're trying to get what we have to get in, right? We're trying to play, right? It's, I think that we spend so much of our time trying to balance the ensemble because there's lots of things going on. There's lots of layers, and there's lots of, everybody's involved the whole time. So I think it's really important that we have the players understand their role. They know where they fit in the mix. They know if they're on they have the spotlight on them or if they don't, and they play accordingly. So let's take it from, you want to take it right on movement 2? Then we'll take it up to let's think, how far? Let's take it past F. Let's go all the way to like O, all right? So let's take it, I'll tell you what, for the sake of argument, we'll just take it up to F one more time, but we won't start back where we did. We'll start right on the snare thing. And we'll take it from there to F again, and then we'll just simply start at F and go to the second half of the tune. All right, one more time. Here we go. This is right on the snare entrance. Technically this is movement 2, and all the way to letter F. All right. Just a couple other minor things to point out. You'll notice that the snare line, after they finish their lick, or like halfway through their initial thing that they do in movement 2, there's a split roll that happens. And I guess I'm dating myself and thinking it's kind of like the North Star in 1980. You know, the split roll started happening, and I figured it was just another way to add that kind of chaos to what's happening. The other thing that I didn't mention really is the keyboard players and what they're doing on the cymbals. With playing all of our Sabian stuff, there's so many different sounds, and we just sort of orchestrated crescendo choke crashes and all sorts of in a very chaotic way, so that it just adds to that feeling we're having. So let's move on. Let's go from the fill or the lead in to letter F, and let's take it all the way to. You want to take it to the tempo change, to the next solo. All right, and so fortunately here we you know, we're using our focus primarily in terms of just designing things is to integrate the percussion fully into the whole package. So we're trying to treat the brass line and the percussion line as more or less equals. Obviously, it's not completely equal. We play a much more supportive role most of the time, but we're trying to be involved and sort of have our voice heard in like I said, in a conversational way. So a lot of times the brass create windows for us to sort of lead back to the brass, and just all at that point, it's really, from an arranger standpoint, it's all about voice leading. It's all about leading and having direction that leads to the next thing that you're handing it to. And I think it's part of the reason why it sounds interesting the whole time is because everything has a purpose. Everything is leading to the next thing, and then through the orchestration of what we're doing with what Sandy and I are doing with the keyboards and the percussion is that we also work together too in terms of how we integrate that stuff. So let's take the pickups to letter F and we'll stop at the next tempo change, right? Great. And realize that I think yesterday we worked it out for just a little bit, trying to figure out the chunks of what we're doing so that we can have like bite-sized parts of the show. But the first thing that I was talking about as far as Harrison and the chromatic stuff happens right away. That's the very first thing that happens in this phrase. So it's a very easy thing to overlook, but I just want to go to bat for that and make sure that that's another thing that's really noticeable to happen. And it plays another crucial part into the way you feel about the piece. I think it's very chromatic and it's very unsettling. And I think that's kind of the point of the show, which was to go, to have extreme opposites to go in different directions. And you'll notice that there's a section in the middle that really breaks down and just the vibraphones are playing a chord before we ramp it back up and do another sort of, another phrase that's going to add to that, the way you feel. So this time notice Harrison and we'll take the same chunk this time, just the same exact chunks, all right? Most of that section is done where the focus is entirely on the horn line. And I actually think it's a great moment in terms of the way it's staged. It really highlights the various sections in the chorus. So once we and we drop way down and there's a really dissonant chord in the vibes, we kind of stay under the radar for a long time. So all of that stuff is kind of easy stuff that you would miss if the focus is not on this, but it's really interesting the way it all works underneath it. And hopefully you appreciate the sort of timpani work and what's going on. So now let's go on. I think there was a question from the chat room, or whatever you call it. Is it called the chat room? So Aaron is going to read the question and we'll answer it.
All right, first question from Gunnar is what order you typically write the music, both within the percussion ensemble and also brass to percussion?
So I won't be long-winded about this, but it changes. It's not exactly the same every single time. It depends on the music. There are several components that it's brass and percussion has myself and Sandy writing it, and then sound design. Those 4 elements have to be put together. We talk about it thoroughly before anybody writes anything, and we sort of get and make sure that everyone has the general same idea of what's going on. And then Evan will draft sort of a sketch of everything, like what he feels like everyone wants in the piece, and he'll just use his taste to do it. And then that'll go usually to me and Sandy. And I think sometimes it depends on who's got a solid idea of what it's going to be. And for example, if I hear a phrase where I know what we're going to do, I'll get that down. So the order of writing usually rarely, if ever, happens chronologically. It usually does not happen from measure 1 to the end. It's usually sporadic throughout it. So we'll create moments that we know are concrete, like we know this is going to have to sound like this. And then we'll work either backwards or forwards to connect these phrases, sort of like islands in the ocean that are connected by bridges. And sometimes Sandy likes me to write some things first to get an idea of what I want. And a lot of times, as a matter of fact, even this morning, we're writing something where I have a great job because I can just sort of like generally describe like, hey, I think we should do this, or I think it needs a little more of that, and she'll have to take all that information and really digest it and figure out how to best say that. And so we're both speaking from the same voice. We have very similar musical tastes, so it's not really ever a problem when it comes to that. And then the last part of the puzzle is Dave Isaac and the sound design. And I know that a lot of these topics are really, I don't know, they're loaded a little bit in terms of how things are done, but they're all done differently. There are certain moments that are strictly sound design. And there are certain moments where sound design just tries to find their windows of opportunity. And I think a lot of that, it's a good way to say it because I tend to do the same thing, where we're finding windows to be heard. We're trying not to say the same thing as other people, and we're trying to actually, if we can find windows of opportunity, it becomes more audible. And I think any of the changes that we have made this year are simply for that. Like we've changed a very few things, but every time we've changed them, it's been for a very specific reason, and that is to make it more audible or to take care of a slight timing issue when we get the show out on the field. And sometimes it's just made, the change is made just to make it more exciting. Or it's very rare that we would, like something doesn't work because it's so well thought out beforehand. So a lot of times when they get the music, it kind of is what it is. And it does stay the same because we communicate as a design team so thoroughly that there's never a big miscommunication, like something happens where we're not aware of that was going to happen. And then the final piece of the puzzle when it comes to that is the visual design. And that is, there's a couple of moments we'll talk about later that are kind of funny, but that's the final X factor. And fortunately, we have good musicians also writing the drill. They understand how sound works, and they understand, voice leading and hearing things like that. All right. So hopefully that answers the question. I wish there was a book. I wish there was a manual that says here how you write music, but there's not. It depends on the actual piece of music. So, all right, this is going to be. We're going to start. Z, can we start a little before that? And this is going to be covering the tempo change to the end of the tune, right? You think that's too big of a chunk? We can start right on it, or we can just back it up a little bit, whichever. And a lot of times, I mean, I guess the the way I communicate to the line is like, they're adults and they're one step away from being professional musicians themselves. So we talk to them that way, you know, and they're playing it. So I want their opinion as far as the way it feels and what's the most logical place to start. So this is going to be, we're covering the tempo change, the bass drum, tempo change, and then we're going to the end of the chart. You want to start right on it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. and so you can tell that the end of the piece, we tie it back up. We tie it back up using a familiar material, and what that does, I think, compositionally, it helps you connect the whole tune together. I want to say that's probably 4 minutes and something. It's a long piece of, it's a long bit of music between the beginning of the show to here, and I think by recapitulating some of that stuff, it just connects it all and makes it seem like it goes by a lot quicker. So a couple of things to point out in this, you'll notice that when the ending starts, there's like a whole ending section where it's just opportunities. It's like we're the drum set player and the band's hitting the stop time stuff and we fill it all up. And so it's da-da, da-da, and every one of those rhythmic motifs separates a little bit more and makes it really interesting. So it wouldn't make sense, I don't think, for us to drop down to piano and crescendo that last thing, but it's just more powerful. And I think the device that we use is simply taking the notes of those hits and just manipulating the rhythms so that they become wider and create bigger spaces for us to do it. And we're playing a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of complicated rhythms in there, 30-second note 4-lits across the bar, and just like more rhythms than, you know, I'd probably bore you with the rhythms, but you notice at the end, I think I just sort of abandoned ship and we just simply play like, like 5 loudest notes we can and end with a big old left hand. And it always makes me smile when I see that. I think it's perfect in terms of the way that the release of that phrase. I think it's really nice. So let's just do that one more time. Anything else I'm forgetting about? You know what? One thing that we forget is we've dealt with, we have a xylophone player in the pit, and Sandy and I definitely are totally committed to the instrumentation we use. We use chimes, we use timpani, and we use a xylophone, which would be very easiest for us to not use that. But one of the things that we've done recently is we just sort of manipulate the xylophone mallets. So hold up we used what are these called, 4004s or something? Or yeah. They're a wrapped xylophone mallet. I think it actually ends up making the marimba section more audible, believe it or not. Regardless, if it's not the right mallet in terms of blend, then all of a sudden it sounds like a xylophone concerto, and you know, Sandy refers to it as like the ice cream truck sound, where it's all just super high end, and it really what it does is sort of eliminate the warmer sounds that were happening. So we just take that mallet down a little bit, and you'll notice that a lot of the 16th note runs or the statements that they make, now you can hear the entire section with a similar quality of sound. I think it really is super handy for us to use in terms of blending all that stuff. So let's do that one more. I think, I don't know if anybody has transcribed the end, but it would be pretty tough to transcribe the end. So I guess that's a challenge to somebody, is to figure out like if we can like understand exactly all of those rhythms. And it's great the way it's orchestrated visually too. It's like they're hoofing it right across the front. And they're kind of plowing their way through the core. It's super exciting, and I just love this. It's one of my favorite parts of the show. All right, can we do all that again, please? Yeah, love it. I'm glad we kind of caught that at the end. You notice that the bridge, after we return to the kind of the Arvo Pärt sound at the end, the sound effect machines sort of take us and are able to sort of in real time actually gauge how long it will take to dissipate, so that we can get to the next section. And this next section is started by Maddie playing a cabasa, and I think that. I said this to the group yesterday, and I think it's it's true. It's like we play with our hands a few times in the show, and I don't think that was a goal. I don't think we said, yeah, we need to play with our hands in the show. I don't think that was that way at all. I think it's a logical evolution of the dynamic that we're trying to get. If we're really trying to do extreme dynamic levels, like the ending of the last chart and the beginning of this chart are absolutely extreme, as extreme as you can get, and so. One of the things that we talked about as a design team is using the human voice a little bit more and in an unusual way. And so the whole core comes down to the front and whispers. And it's like kind of nonsensical whispering. It's meant to be modern and confusing, and they are combining that with some movement that looks very contemporary and very modern. And so since the core has brought it down to a whisper, literally a whisper. So then the first thing that we have to do is I thought, okay, if the snare drums play with their fingertips, on a concert snare drum, it has a great sound, and it actually does sound good with 9 players playing with their fingertips. We tried cymbals, things like that, just to get a little more sound, but it actually does sound better with nothing and just simply their fingertips. And what the reason for the orchestration in the beginning is we thought that a cabasa and sand blocks and things that have that kind of sound, that ch-ch-ch sound with the hands on it, would all blend together really nicely and allow us to sort of create a texture underneath the whispers. So the whispers are kind of out of time, and then all of a sudden we add time to what's going on, and then the snares come in, and then eventually the first thing playing in the batteries, the quad line sets up the 8th note ostinato for the Bartók that we use. We use the 4-string quartet, movement 2 and 4, which are unusual. Like when you hear them, it doesn't automatically say, oh yeah, this would work for drum corps, but it does give us the opportunity to play soft, and I think that was the priority for us to do it. So this whole section before Maddie starts on the cabasa it has some length to it, but we don't rehearse that so much because it's simply out of time. And then when Maddie comes in, that's when time is starting, and you'll hear the sand blocks come in, and then the hands will come in, and everything creates a really mellow texture. And I think that's our answer to total contrast in what's happening. All right, so can we take it up to, let's take it up through the tuba solo. You know what I mean? Let's go through all those solos. You want to take it up to, yeah, take it up to where we cut out, and it's a really nice brass moment. It's actually a full ensemble. It's the whole brass ensemble does a feature really soft, and we're going to go up to that point where we lead our parts to hand off to the horn section at that point. All right, here we go. This is from the getting out of the whispers all the way to the horn soli and in the middle of the chart. So at the beginning of this chart, I mean, obviously we're in a theater, and there's a lot of reverb and a lot of resonance, but outside we really reach, I would consider like a professionally soft level. And I think that's, I think that's what we're after, is to, is to create that kind of like real world soft. There's drum corps soft, and then there's the real world soft. And so we're trying to get at least a little closer to that. So I think it's just it's a really entertaining part of the show, because I think it's so easy to hear everything, and I think musically, I think that's part of the reason why it's really interesting for us to do that. All right, so can we hear that one more time, please? I'm sure I'm forgetting a million things, but let's hear it one more time, and I'll just add a couple more thoughts before we go on. So this entire section right now is I think movement 2 of the Bartók 4th string quartet. And so we're using movement 2 and movement 4. Movement 2 is faster than movement 4. So movement 4 is a slower movement, and then we decided to put those two movements together and change the order of them so that the faster movement happens next, and it sort of ramps it up and makes it a little more exciting, but still trying to sort of control the dynamic so that we're not trying to play loud. I think that play loud all the time. I think there's an easy thing in drum corps that it's like a nuclear arms race, you know what I mean? It's like eventually you can get so loud that it never seems loud enough, and I imagine the same thing will happen for being soft, but we're not there yet. So when we get this soft, it really pulls people in from an effect standpoint and makes you listen a little more carefully, and I think that was kind of the point of what we're doing. All right, same thing, please. Same exact thing. When I see that, one of the things I remember is they play a rough section. See, can you just play that little? So that, believe it or not, it's kind of, I got that idea from, is it Pratt or Wilcoxon? I can't remember the two, but there's a Pratt etude that has that little, right? It has a paradiddle with a ruff into a right hand, and it's really interesting. And I remember thinking that was like the perfect classical sound that we have. And I'm still shocked that those 30-second note ruffs come out as clean as they are, because it's like really, it's really like a great sound that's kind of rudimental but orchestral at the same time. It's just really, I think it lifts the whole chart up at that point. And Sandy had put in a dee-da-dum, dee-da-dum, which is part of the original, and I think that's one of my favorite interactions between the snares and the vibraphones in that part. So this leads to the second end. Right now we got to the horn feature. So this is where, if we're gonna play it all, we can't get in the way of the horn feature, right? It's a totally supportive role. So this would be the perfect moment to play even softer with our fingers. And you'll notice that, I don't know if you can hear it from the front, but they actually do those ruffs that Zeke just demonstrated. We actually do that with our fingers as well. So you can hear the actual conversation between the quads and snares during that section. And it's actually topped off by a cymbal scrape that is truly like a mezzo forte orchestral cymbal scrape, and you can hear it clearly. It's with the marching cymbals and with one, a couple of players in the front ensemble, and it actually does kind of cap that part off. It's kind of funny because it's so soft, and yet you can clearly hear it in the stadium. It's really interesting. So we're going to go through that section. There's going to be a tempo change. Well, I'll give a shout out to that, which is a tempo change like out of space, like out of nowhere. It's unrelated, and they just sort of like get into it. It's amazing how that they can just sort of think alike and do that. And then we play an entire percussion solos over that movement of the Bartók. And so once again, I think what I'd like people to notice here is the fact that there's so many things going on. There's so many musical lines, multiple musical lines happening in the keyboard section and being featured at the same time. And I think we have to make a choice. It's really easy for us to stop everything and just play a feature. There's nothing in the way. But to me, I just find it more interesting when the solo that's happening either in the battery somewhere is related, is related somehow to another part. And then it kind of anchors it and gets me to feel it in a certain way. I think without that, you risk sounding similar for all the solos. You see what I mean? Like there's a difference between these drum solos. How many solos do we have in the show? There's probably like lots, right? There's at least 6 or so, and they're very short and sweet, but they're integrated in a way where it doesn't seem like everything stops and we just play a solo. This is all like trying to kind of get that stuff in the context of the piece. All right, so let's just start from the fingers where we just stopped and see if we can take it to the end of that chart. And then they're going to do one thing at the end that I'll talk about just a little bit, but we'll hear it first, right? So we'll take that chunk again. There's a lot to talk about, but I feel like I'm talking too much. So let's just play that again, and we're going to include a whole ending to this thing, which is the funny thing is I thought it would be great to sort of dissolve and do a Molto retard. Back I don't know, the 80s or old drum corps days, there used to be a kind of a lot of that where we would, the drum line would accelerate or decelerando something. And I remember seeing Santa Clara play in the 80s, and there was a very, very short movement. I want to say it was 1985 or, yeah, it was about 85 or 86. And it was just like, and I thought it was really musical at the time. I was only like 20 years old or something like that, and I thought, wow, this is like these guys really feel the beat the same way. And so we just took that to the absolute extreme, and handing it to the drill writer and expecting like a 1985 like arc, you know, to play this kind of thing, and getting it back and realizing they're marching quarter notes backwards and expanding the form while they're doing this. And I'm still amazed. And so the drum staff, we're totally impressed every time we hear this, because it's really difficult to do. And I think the tendency is to play it well enough to make it seem like it's sort of easy, but knowing what they're doing, it's really difficult. So we'll do the same exact thing and add that on to the end. All right, here we go. And step out. Only in the parking lot, right? I mean, I think it's funny, all right? I like it. So hopefully you can see like that roll, that double stroke roll goes through all sorts of rhythmic development to get to that point. Like it's all written in a way that they have to figure out like how the quarter note matches with that pulse, and it's really great. There's one question. Aaron will read one more.
Yeah, a question from Leo. How do you manage to maintain the balance of sound between the battery and pit without having one section overpower the other, especially during moments of impact?
You know, that's kind of an easy question to answer. I know it's an important question to answer, but instruments themselves have a natural volume level that they can play at. A lot of instruments can play at a wide range of dynamics, but generally speaking, they can only get so loud or they can only get so soft. So knowing that as arrangers, especially like Sandy and myself, like we know that. We know what can you play if somebody's playing a vibraphone with a really soft mallet, like what is going to push that out of the room and what can't they compete with, and we don't even entertain that idea. We simply orchestrate in a way that naturally makes instruments audible and heard. So I think it's a little bit of an orchestration thing. I mean, obviously you have a performance quality, and you can adjust people's volume and balance, but there has to be a baseline. You know what I mean? There has to be like a flat, like a baseline of how soft is too soft or how loud is too loud for some instruments to compete with. And we just make sure we never get into that area. A lot of times I'll ask the pit to play a little bit firmer because they can easily get to a volume level which the battery, the articulation of the battery can easily make them sound like they're too soft or the battery's too loud. So we simply like change the baseline volume of the bottom end of the pit so that the battery has a chance to get underneath it. So it's all about that. It's all about creating a baseline that somebody can go under it and over it so that you are not wiping people out in terms of just orchestration. Hopefully that answers the question. So let's go on. I'll spend less time talking. This is going to be the ballad section. And this is combining a couple of charts. There's Epitaph for a Moonlight, and then there's a I want to say a pop tune by FKA Twigs, which we found which fit perfectly. Like stylistically, I'm not sure if you'd say that in the same sentence with Bartók and it would make sense, but it totally works, and it's completely fitting with what we're doing. And one of the things that we are experimenting with is the questionable tonality or the pitch bendy nature of what's going on. And so I remember talking to Sandy earlier and thinking, you know what, a lot of people have done tried to play with bows, and I think we have too. We've done this over the years, and it's always come kind of like one step short, where it's always somewhat inaudible, or the people who know, but nobody else does because it's so hidden. And so we wanted to create a section that was overt, that was absolutely like you cannot miss the fact that we're bowing this melody. Adding Christian on the theremin gives it a sort of surreal nature in terms of the melodic content and how that pitch bends all over the place. But I remember just like ordering 20 bows or something like that and saying, okay, if we're going to go there, let's go it. And I just Sandy and I talked, and I said, here's kind of the tools that we need to use, and she like in a genius way figuring out how to move people from different instruments to cover certain notes. It's like a big math problem, and she's a big time theory nerd, so she was like really into that, and it's just really seamlessly orchestrated. You can hear all of the chords happening with bows because each player has 2 bows. It allows them to be somewhat artistic about playing it, and then the theremin itself kind of holds it together in terms of the melodic content, while the bows provide harmony in a background way. And it's really interesting because you can't predict sometimes what a bow does, right? It sort of fires or it doesn't, or it sort of swells and it doesn't. So there's a certain like amorphous quality to what's going on. And like I said, I think this is really interesting the whole way. I really love listening to this. So can we do? Let's do the ballad all the way up to where Tiger comes in, and stop. Got it? And this will be on Megan. Yeah, sounds pretty and different, and I think that's what we all like about it. It's just different. It sounds modern and produced. I must say, like, that is probably one of the, I really like what Dave did in terms of sound design, especially behind the bows. It's got this reverse sort of sound to it that sounds really interesting. It just fits so well with the kind of what we're doing. All right, and so the last phrase that they did, I think it goes. I think everybody in the world can recognize that sound, and Sandy has like taken it to the next place. I thought it was, I remember even saying that to her. I said, you just need to do what you do right there. That has to be like a signature sound kind of thing, and I think it really captures everything. It's beautiful. I never get tired of hearing it. I'm sure the players love playing it every single time, and it's really a 10. So unfortunately, we're kind of running out of time, so I gotta move along a little bit. But I think the other thing that has to be said is the theremin acts kind of like the way the timpani acts. You'll notice that everything is sort of surreal and textural, and all of a sudden the theremin can make us kind of understand the melody. But then Harrison comes in and really kind of separates on his own, sort of gets us to the next section, and it's all tuned and it's very difficult. And so that last phrase, we call that letter D. And that last phrase is nothing but keyboards. And so what happens now is the battery comes in kind of seamlessly way back near the back sideline. And they come in kind of a seamless way. And we worked out the timing between Megan and the battery and the way that the pit hears it, so that it really is, before you know it, all of a sudden the battery's in. And that pit, the front ensemble keyboard feature keeps going for a while. And then the battery adds in, and then later, very quickly, the horns add in. And then we finally get to the big arrival of the ballad. All right? So how much of that do you want to hear? We can start at letter D, maybe? And then take letter D so we can kind of understand that connection between the previous phrase. And letter D to the end of the ballad. You got it? Yeah. So you'll notice a quote at the end. Send in the clowns, and I think we decided to like use that as a vehicle throughout the entire show, disguised in many different ways. We thought that would be also very appropriate to take something that's known and to put it through our filter of Avant Garde, and to, you know, I think it's similar to you know, movements in art where like Picasso's Cubist thing, where all of a sudden you see a person but it's deconstructed and in a different way. You can kind of recognize it, but it's interesting every time you see it. And I think that happens throughout the show. There's little nuggets everywhere in terms of that piece. The closer definitely exploits that a little bit more, and we actually sort of like get you closer to understanding that at the end of the piece. So this next piece is View from Olympus by John Sothis. And I say that, you can tell when I say that, it's like a little question in my mind, because there's a lot of things that go into this. A lot of, for example, the beginning, the battery is featured, but underneath it, if you can hear it, it's got like a combination of chords from fretless from the beginning to actually give you a sort of thread throughout the whole show. So even when you don't notice it overtly, it's still kind of related to the rest of the show and provides motivation for us to write things and play things that are, you know, not so obvious, but related and nonetheless, right? So this will be, you notice we end in a completely beautiful acoustic piano bell method, and then all of a sudden the sound design completely takes us in a different direction. And then keeping with the style of what the show, the snare break is got a lot of space to it, and it's got a lot of unusual rhythms to it. It's very complicated. We'll put it up sometime and we'll hear it, but it's really challenging in terms of just waiting and having patience and maturity, and these guys do such a great job with it. The only thing we changed before was the quad break after that. Because if you'll hear a recording early season, it's slightly different now, and the only reason is because I had to give sort of punctuation so the pick could hear clearly what's going on, because in the drill the quads are leaving us, and then other parts of the chord get in the way, and it's harder to hear. And so the way it was before was one long lyrical sort of solo, and I just broke that up in a way that made it a little more exciting. And that, you know, that reminds me of just the ballad. Well, when that time when the battery comes in to the end, you can argue that's one long phrase. And it's a little more difficult to get players to get that and to understand that you have to start from point A and create an arc all the way to Z. And that is, you know, it just requires a lot of understanding on their parts and a lot of rehearsal, you know, to make sure that we can, if you want an epic payoff at the end, I think you need a bigger runway. Right? You need a jet to take off, right? We don't want to like micro phrase things too much. We want to create an effect at the end of that phrase. So that's why that phrase is so long in terms of building and developing. All right, so this is the next thing. We'll start right on movement 4, and we'll take it up to the horn feature, up to the first bass 5 muted note. You got it? Let's take it from there. Here we go. Okay, so that exposes us once again. The way I feel it is it goes by so quickly because I think it's all connected and related to each other. So it starts out with more of the fretless, and then it moves towards the John Sothis. So all of that material underneath the battery features is kind of gets us from one place and goes to the next place. I think that the only thing I think we ever did was I got Sandy to like give me a bunch of chords, and I think we just sort of like were able to move them around to be heard in certain spots during the percussion break, so they were at least a little bit more audible. But it actually fits perfectly well. I think the snares and the vibes actually make a good combination, and it sounds interesting. As soon as the bass line hits, there's a split between 4 and 5. I guess that's my way of saying like 4 and 5 don't get as much credit as they need to get, and so I just give them a seriously difficult split. But it all is also on top of the point where Harrison is glistening through the entire set of timpani at the same time. So it has this real descending, yeah, and then it lands on the quad break, and that actually is sort of the material of the new tune. The other thing that was thought about was like, making every percussion feature a little bit different, I think, is also a needed thing. I don't want to hear us go to the same well every single time. So you notice that this battery or this percussion feature in general doesn't end with like big, huge, loud double stops. We have done this a couple times before. So it leads to a horn feature, and so I thought the most logical way to do it was ask that the final feature would be a keyboard feature, which would take us down into a relatively easy to balance volume that hands directly to the horn line. So it's a better connection to the horn line. I think you can make that connection a number of ways, but we just decided to do it that way just because it was a little different than what we had done before. And so then you'll hear the accompaniment behind, everything behind that we're going to play next is all behind a horn feature. You can tell that there's lots of space, but you can tell that we sort of phrase and outline the horn feature to get you to emphasize certain parts of the phrase. And I think that's why we sort of wait, and I bring them in, and we take them out, we wait for them, and then they bring in, and then they finally kind of stack in and get us to the end of the chart, all right? And then there's one change coming. I'll give you guys a heads up. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but there's a change at the end of the show that makes it a little bit more interesting, a little more effective. We're going to learn that like right after this rehearsal, I think, and then put it in next Tuesday or something like that, so that we finally finish the puzzle, right? And it's all works well. So let's try that one again. You want to just go to the end? It's a little bit of a long haul in terms of the end, but it's not that long. It's like a quirky way to end. I think it's easy to sort of stack the deck at the end of the show and really just try to play as loud as possible for as long as possible, but we simply don't do that. We just thought it would be more interesting to end in a more fitting way and not make that overblown at the end. All right, so we're going to take it from the same spot, go all the way to the end, and then we'll answer a few questions, and then we'll do the whole thing. All right? Thank you. Yeah, it sounds great. I mean, obviously, there's one thing to talk about, I think, in that piece is we do a very stereotypical company front sort of designed, and it's meant to be that way. It's meant to be like an absolutely down the middle of Main Street, here comes the company front thing, and then Harrison has a timpani roll, and then it leads to the whole thing being different. So the whole thing, instead of being a company front and marching forward in halftime, ends up being the horns taking a different position, playing into the ground, so that's super soft. And then to accommodate that, we had to take the part and sort of like divvy it up. And so to have less volume, we simply had fewer people playing, and it grows over time. So it's really a challenge for them to do this because it's on the move, and it's very complicated drill. And we have one person and another person adds, and they have to jump in on it right in the kind of in a difficult section. It's like it wasn't originally written to be that way. So what we did was basically divide up the part in a way that makes sense, so that eventually it grows to everyone being in the same spot. And that was a design related thing. And so the keyboards go to town a little bit. Sandy had written an original part that was strong, and it was loud. It was meant to be behind a company front, right? And so the only thing that I requested, or we had figured out, was that if we kept it a little more limited in terms of how far it goes on the keyboards, we could maintain that softer volume and sound a little bit like Bob Becker playing xylophone. I think that was kind of the point of what we were trying to do with that. And then that grows up. We recapitulate a bunch of themes in the show. You can hear like every 2 measures it modulates in a couple of spots, and eventually gets to the point where we resolve the whole thing. So we'll take a question, or
Sure.
You guys can relax. The next thing we'll do would be a whole run. All right, if you want to get a quick drink, that's fine.
So, next question is from Chris. What arrangers inspired you the most as you were learning to write?
That's a good question. Nobody's really asked that question. When I was 16, 17, I started just transcribing. And this is obviously, you don't have to be that old to write music with a pencil. Like it all happened not that long ago. You know what I mean? It's like, so I learned how to write through transcribing. And I basically will freely admit that the stuff that Ralph Hardiman and Tom Float, Dennis DeLucia, and people like that done, I just transcribed all of it. I really learned a lot from doing that. I think I learned how to write music because I would associate what I felt was a really interesting part that I liked, and then I would dissect it and figure out why I liked it. I figured out what elements were in there that made it sound a certain way. And so it's writing music is kind of a lifelong pursuit. I actually teach a class in writing at UNT, composition, arranging class, and percussion, and it's fascinating. It's a fascinating subject to talk about, which is a very long, open-ended topic. But that's, I think, in a nutshell, the answer to the question is really, really not relying on transcriptions, but doing your own transcriptions so that you can make that connection between what you like and how it's written. I think that's really important to figure that out. If you're only viewing things that have been transcribed by other people, they have learned a lesson, and I don't think you have learned as much of a lesson. So I would recommend that, getting the old headphones out and the old CD player or the cassette player, rewind, rewind, and just like do it until you get it right. And I think that will teach you a lot of the skills you like. I played in the 27th Lancers, which was. It's just kind of a weird thing to say, but it's kind of like the East Coast Vanguard a little bit in terms of style and in terms of what we played. And so I was always a huge fan of Santa Clara Vanguard when I was a kid, and I thought what Fred first did and what Ralph really was in his element there. I thought some of the greatest things that he's written were kind of throughout the 80s. I thought it was really fantastic, and it was inspiring to see. I was fortunate enough to get to see all that stuff live. I saw it in person, and that is another little bit of a thing that's changed among students these days. Is a lot of times it's solely viewed on media. It's a video or it's things like that. That's why I think it's fun for us to do this project right now, is because I know a lot of people in the audience aren't going to have the ability to see the core. There's fewer shows and it's harder to get to, and a lot of people would like to see it, but they can't see it. So I appreciate the Ensemble Block guys for doing this, because it just fills that void for people that they live too far away from a show and they can see it. But seeing all that stuff live was so inspiring to me in terms of just writing music. And I always kind of knew early on, it kind of, I want to say it wasn't a choice sort of thing, but I was kind of knew I was going to write music, and I started younger, and you know, and that to me was the only method to learn how to write music, was transcribing stuff that you liked and figuring it out on your own. And I think to this day, no one has really written a definitive book on how to write music because it's so subjective. It depends on so many factors. But you know, like that's when I grew up. It's like kind of the 80s, and that whole era I thought was really great for drum corps, and it was great for me to learn how to do it through that decade. Right? Any other questions? Or?
There's a lot about tuning.
Tuning. You know what? We use instruments that are made by Dynasty, and I think it's the closest thing that I've seen to like handmade instruments. We use a staved shell process in the snare drums, and I think it's changed the game. We started using that last year, and there was a couple of really residual benefits from that. The way it's manufactured is kind of like a barrel, and there's slices, and they're all put together, and then the bearing edge is created after that. And so what happens is when you tune the drum tighter, it actually makes the head stronger, which is the opposite of the way it used to be. Like in the 90s, anyone in the 90s can relate to like caved in shells because the heads were stronger than the actual shells. And this is actually just sort of built into the process. So it's a lot easier to tune the snare drums and to stay in tune, to be honest with you. So we just simply, it's all about making the drums uniform. I don't think it's so much about like the pitch we use or the specific area in which it's used. I think it's the fact that it is taken care of. We tune before every single show. That's part of our job as a drum staff, is we prepare them for the show. We tune every instrument in the battery before every single show, and it's just something that we value. We think that's important, and so. The pitch ranges where the quads are can vary a little bit, but each drum has its own range, and we like to sit in that range. We don't want to go outside of that range. If we decide to tune the top bass drum outside of its range, the first thing that happens is we lose projection from that drum and we don't hear it. If you're playing in the sweet spot of the drum, it will actually carry further. So it helps audibility and balance, first of all. So if you want a higher sound, well then get a smaller drum, is my answer to that. We have settled in on this instrumentation pretty much for the last 100 years. So and I'm comfortable with that. Sandy's comfortable with what it is, and we can work within this environment. And I think that the instruments, obviously the keyboard instruments are tuned by Doug DeMauro, and it's like the best sounding stuff that you can imagine. And I think that we treat the instruments also, and I know this is outside the tuning question, but we treat the instruments well. It's like, for example, like outside, we typically don't play in direct sunlight when it comes to that. It's kind of funny because every cymbal is covered with a t-shirt outside, and we make sure we don't play full out on metallic instruments in direct sunlight because they can simply get knocked out of tune in one hit, right? And we're just very careful that, you know, as a percussionist, you kind of are what you play on. And you are what you hit and what you hit it with, I think is a very blue-collar way of saying it. It's true. So we take care of the instruments, and we value the companies that support us because we actually do think that these are the best instruments that we can play on. And we just really take care of them so that they always sound pretty good. And so I just think that probably year to year, you recognize that the tuning is not radically different. It's very similar, but the music is totally different. So I think we just find that sweet spot in terms of pitch for each drum and each instrument that we're playing on, so that they all sit in their home area. They're naturally sounding instruments. And then we just understand those instruments and write for them. So, any other questions from anybody? Okay, so I appreciate you guys taking your time to watch us play. We like sharing what we do with everyone, and the way we're going to wrap this up is going to just do a full-blown run-through from start to finish so you can hear everything in context. Because ultimately, that's the most important thing, is when you hear the whole show in context. One thing that we work on a lot is just pacing in terms of the music. Right now, our show sits at around 12:20 or something like that, and it's 12:30, maybe something between 12:20 and 12:35. I think it sits there, and it does seem like it goes by in a flash. It does seem like it's not that long, and I think that's a testament to the way the arrangers have done their job and the way the players play the arrangements. I think it's like it moves along quickly, and every day I hear this, I'm like, as soon as the fifth movement comes around, I'm just like surprised. It's like, oh wow, it's already over. It's already the closer. And I think that's a good thing because it just seems like it goes over in a flash, and it just seems like it's really natural sounding. All right, so I want to thank you guys for taking time out. It actually worked out for us because we're in Texas, and it's like we're being wet bulbed every single time. It's like we go outside and then we're told to go back inside. It's like a little bit hot, so it's been nice to sit in here and in the theater and play for you guys. So I appreciate it, and we'll just do one final run through. Thank you guys. All right. And if you have any questions, just feel free to contact us, and we'll be more than happy to answer them. All right, thank you.